Welcome back to Vetted VA Live. We've been off for a few weeks. We were off last week because of Valentine's Day, so that all of our moderators here could enjoy Valentine's Day with their significant others and family. So good to be back here. We have a great crew of professionals joining us. So want to go through and just remind you, primary thing, well, we always go through a topic in depth and detail. And tonight we're going to be talking about the VA Amendatory Clause, how that impacts you as a buyer, how realtors deal with it, how it's different from normal transactions. So we're going to go through all of that detail. But always want to remind you guys that we're here primarily to answer questions live. So if you're here, you're a Vetted VA member, you're watching and you want a little longer, more in-depth answer, it's a little bit easier for us to go into greater detail in a video format versus just typing answers into a keyboard. So if you're here and you're watching, definitely type a question over here into the comment section and we will get to them as quickly as we can. So I'm going to go through our esteemed guests tonight. Right underneath me here in the Brady Bunch box is Sam Rubin. Sam is in Richardson, Texas. Is that correct? Did I get the city correct, Sam?
Yes, that's correct.
Sam is a realtor and one of our vetted experts. We also, on the bottom row next to her, is Claudia Morales Rothwell here in California with me, with Coldwell Banker Home Source in Apple Valley, California. And then our lending expert and moderator tonight is Mike Payne with New Point Lending in Tampa, Florida. So we've got both coasts covered. We've got the south mid. What is Texas? Is that the southwest, Sam? So we've got everything except for the north and the northeast covered. But before we jump into talking about the VA Amendatory Clause and what that is, we did have a bit of good news. The VA has announced that for loans after April 7th, loans closing on or after April 7th, they're going to do a small reduction in the VA funding fee. For those of you who were paying attention, we had a big increase a couple of years ago when they passed the Blue Water Act, which did away with VA loan limits, but had the side effect of increasing funding fees. So after April 7th of this year, we're going to have lower funding fees for a first-time use. If you've never used your VA benefit before, they're going across the board, they're going down 0.15%. So if you put 0 to less than 5% down, it's going from 2.3% to 2.15. If you do 5 to 10% down, 1.5, it will going to 1.5% from 1.65%. And if you do 10% or more, it's going from 1.4 to 1.25%. So to put that in context, that 0.15%, your VA funding fee is generally financed. Some people will pay it out of pocket, but usually financed. That 0.15% on a $450,000 loan lowers your loan amount about $675, saves you about $5 or $6 on the monthly payment. So it's not a huge difference, but every little bit helps. The biggest difference that we see on a subsequent use, so if you use your VA loan before and you come back and you're using it again with less than 5% down, we're dropping from 3.6 to 3.3%. Still not a huge difference, but everything that moves in our direction is welcome. So I am going to post in the comments here. If you wanted to see those numbers, you can check that out. But with that, let's jump into the VA Amendatory Clause. For those of you at home who don't know what it is, I'm actually going to read it here in a second. But Claudia, do you want to walk through what the VA Amendatory Clause is before we jump into the discussion of it?
Sure, Josh. So basically it's actually the FHA VA Amendatory Clause. It is, it basically lets the seller know that the buyer's using a government-backed loan, FHA or a VA loan, and the price does have, or the home does have to appraise at minimum for the sales price. So
yeah, well, Claudia, so why don't we kind of jump into discussion from there? It's saying it has to appraise. We're coming off of a crazy market for the last few years where every seller in the world wanted borrowers to waive their appraisal contingency. What does that mean in this context, that the property has to appraise or the buyer has a couple of remedies? First of all, what are those options? I mean, does it mean the deal's dead if it doesn't appraise?
No, not at all. I always say when the property doesn't appraise, you have 4 options. You can cancel the transaction, which of course nobody wants to do. The seller can reduce the price, which of course they probably don't want to do. The buyer can come in with the difference to make up the price, which a lot of buyers might not be able to do. Or lastly, it could be a combination of both, a compromise. Every side gives a little bit to make it work.
And in the current market, we just talked a minute ago that 2 years ago, buyers had no leverage. The sellers were just saying, hey, take it or leave it. Sam, what are you seeing in your market in Texas? Are we getting to a more balanced market where we're seeing some of that back and forth, give and take negotiation between buyers and sellers?
The current market is definitely a buyer's market here in Texas. We are getting closing cost assistance again. Repairs are being done. If a low appraisal does happen, we are seeing the sellers more susceptible to taking the lower price. So it's definitely a buyer's market in Texas. There are some homes that they list, to get multiple offers because they know how the market is, but it's still a buyer's market right now.
So would you say it comes down to where we are in the market and the desirability of the property that your buyer is buying or that you are listing for a seller? It's what Chris Rock had this saying that a man is as faithful as his options. So in this situation, sellers are going to be as flexible as the market requires of them. Is that about right?
That is correct.
So with that, you really want to rely on your real estate professional and to a lesser degree, your lender of saying, where is both our local market right now? And how about this specific property in terms of desirability? Do they have multiple options behind you? And that would dictate, because if they feel like they have 3, 4, 5 offers and someone keeps calling the agent every couple of days saying, hey, how's your transaction going? How's it coming? Then they might be more inclined to push back versus if you were the only offer or they have to move on to another transaction, would likely make them a little bit more amenable to working with you on that. Mike, we're going to get to you and the loan side in a second here, but I do kind of want to continue down this path of, for you guys, Sam and Claudia, as a realtor, whether you're working and representing the buyer or whether you're representing the seller, how does the difference here, again, whether FHA or VA, we're talking here specifically about VA, but this amendatory clause, this escape clause makes it sound even worse for the sellers that the buyer can escape from the transaction. How does this impact both your negotiations on the buyer side and the seller side and just the transaction in general? Is this a big hurdle? Does it depend on where the market is at?
I would say for my area, I always include the amendatory clause when I'm writing up an offer for a veteran. Our area, I want to say, is very military friendly, so I haven't really had a lot of issues with that. But I have received offers on my listings from agents from outside of the area representing veteran buyers, and sometimes they don't include that, which they should, because it is written into the contract that if it's an FHA or a VA offer, you do have to include that. So I think maybe there's a little bit of misunderstanding of what it does and what it's for, but it's always included because even after escrow is opened and offers accepted, the lender will ask us to have that signed. So, but it should be signed and it should be part of the offer package.
And with that being upfront, everyone then knows this is a government loan, FHA or VA, and the buyer can't be compelled to close that transaction if the property doesn't appraise. Now, how often, the answer should be never, but Sam, Claudia, how often do you come across a newer agent or an agent that hasn't experienced a VA or an FHA loan that they're not familiar with this escape clause and what it means for the transaction?
I've actually come across it quite a bit, which is very sad and unfortunate, but I've come across many agents who've never done a VA transaction or even an FHA transaction, but more so VA. And I have to explain to them that this is a federal document, federal guidelines that we don't control. And they can take it how they, unfortunately, as the agent representing the seller, they can persuade their seller to go a different direction because they don't understand the process and or the document. And it can sometimes not go in favor of the buyer. But we try our hardest to, make the document not kill the deal before it even starts.
And it's really surprising that you would think, what I believe last year FHA was about 11% of the market, VA was probably a little bit less than that, but say we're somewhere in the market of 20% of transactions are FHA or VA transactions. You would think that most realtors are aware of this and what it means for their transaction, but I know we come across it all the time that someone's completely unaware and they see this and they kind of are taken aback. So unfortunately, it's a reality that us on the lending side that you guys deal with on that side. Do you guys feel like that was a portion of the reason when we're going through a very strong seller's market that sellers and their representatives on the real estate side were a little bit hesitant to take a VA offer when they had other offers on the table?
Yeah, I think there was a misconception that if you didn't have a down payment or if you don't have a large deposit, as would be most cases on a VA offer, that it wasn't a credit-worthy buyer, which is false.
Mm-hmm. Same. Here in Texas, they created, because the market got so crazy, Texas actually created a document in favor of conventional loans where they could waive appraisals and stuff like that, but you couldn't do that with FHA and VA. So now they created a document to entice sellers even more against our government-backed loans, which I really dislike and still dislike to this day, and I hope they take it away. But yeah.
Well, with that, so Sam, say in your instance, there's a property that has multiple offers. There's 3 offers, 2 conventional, and you're writing an offer for a veteran. How would you go about selling around that and talking to the other agent about why this is not going to be a problem for your transaction? I know you deal with a lot of veterans, do a lot of VA transactions. What is your approach in that situation?
My approach with my realtor partners is relationship building, and they know me. A lot of the agents out here in the market know who I am. They know what I represent. Most 99% of my closings close with 99% compared to some. So they know that I deal with lenders that's going to get the deal closed. And if there's any issues up front, I make sure that I, check the CMA. Is there going to be an issue with the appraisal? If there is, we discuss that up front. There will be no surprises during the transaction because we know, hey, this is what's going to happen. And in the event that it does happen, this is what we're allowed to do with a VA loan. FHA, you don't really get to rebuttal appraisals. I've done it once. And that's because we had solid comps and the appraiser just was, being what they were. But for the most part, FHA, you don't really get the rebut. Conventional, I've never had any conventional appraisals adjusted. So VA, you always have the opportunity compared to the other ones.
Absolutely. So let's talk about that. Unfortunately, it looks like we lost Mike's connection here. But what I wanted to go through is why does the VA do this? And it's for 2 reasons. It's because the VA is actually on the hook for guaranteeing these loans. So they want to make sure that they're not making loans on properties that aren't worth what the buyer has agreed to pay. But more importantly, they want to protect the veteran. So it's for your protection. Unfortunately, some of the things that we've talked about tonight let you know that there's a downside to that as well, where it sometimes sellers and their representatives can look at it negatively. But that's where, pros like Claudia and Sam come in here to basically explain it. But let's take a step back and go through the VA appraisal process and how that is different than another type of loan. So with an FHA loan or a conventional loan, as a lender like myself, when we get a purchase contract, we send out your disclosure, we're ready to order the appraisal. Generally, we're going to an appraisal management company. A bigger lender may have an appraisal management desk inside their company, but they are ordering that. They're placing that order through the appraisal management company. With the VA, very different. We go to the VA and the VA assigns an appraiser. So that is where Sam's talking about. It gets really different in terms of having to rebut an appraisal. And the biggest difference there is Tidewater. So under Tidewater, if an appraiser gets assigned by the VA, they go out to Claudia's listing and they inspect the house and they look at the comps and they go, This house is under contract for $500,000 and I'm not seeing it. They can't just throw an appraisal back at me and go, hey, we think it's worth 475. They have to come back and say, we're invoking Tidewater. We have a brief period of time where we can go back, we being our side, buyer, lender, buyer's agent, listing agent. We can go back and say, gather any and all documentation that we believe supports the value and provide that to the appraiser before they ever create their report. And I think this is the best possible system. And it would be awesome if FHA and conventional would do it, because what happens is once an appraiser gives us that report and says, I think it's worth 475, when we go back to them, we're saying, you're wrong. They can hear it as you're dumb, you're incompetent, you don't know what you're doing. And the most common thing is they dig in their heels. And if we get any change or any improvement, it's pretty minor. So in a VA transaction, they're saying, hey, I'm not seeing the value here. Do you have any additional information? So it's a collaborative process where we're giving them additional information to hopefully arrive at the answer that we, the buyer and the seller, have agreed to in terms of the purchase price. So Claudia, what does that look like? Have you had a loan officer come back to you and say, hey, our appraiser is invoking Tidewater, and ask you to work and collaborate with them on providing some additional documentation to the appraiser?
Yeah, I would say the last few months of last year, I did have a couple that came in lower. So we all worked together, even the listing agent, I represented the buyer, the listing agent went back to the seller and said, I need a detailed list of all the upgrades that you did, because that was part of the reply that she was going to send, that the lender was also going to send on our behalf to show the value. But something that I try to do, and a lot of other agents I know try to do as the listing agent, is to meet the appraiser at the property with some comparables that support our purchase price. It doesn't mean that they're going to accept it. It doesn't even mean that they're going to look at what we give them, but it is an opportunity for us to say, this is how I arrived at this purchase price, and this is why I think it's priced correctly. So all agents should be doing that.
So hopefully it's kind of preempting it. So even if it's an FHA or a conventional deal and you don't have this opportunity to give the additional information, you're preempting it and showing up. So 100% agree. And it kind of amazes me when we either have a listing agent have someone in their office provide the agent access, or, hey, there's a lockbox and it's not there to at least have that conversation where, you know, a lot of times, I don't know about you guys, Sam, Claudia, tell me what you guys think about this. I have agents all the time tell me, this person's not even from this area. They don't understand values. And I go, okay, well, there's not enough appraisers for us to get someone that lives in every neighborhood or was within 2 miles of a property. So if their office is 10 miles away, for us in Southern California, Apple Valley, and I would bet Tampa, pretty similar, you'd be 10 miles away. There's a lot of neighborhoods, a lot of properties. So they don't necessarily know the nuances of a neighborhood. I had one here recently that it was a special architect, famous architect. And it happened to be, it was a flip, but not like just your regular guy that goes and buys a house and puts $50,000 into it. This guy buys these high-end architects' properties that haven't been updated for 40 or 50 years and restores them like new. So obviously that appraisal was going to be difficult. Both of the agents come back to me and they go, this guy he's not even from here. He doesn't know the value. I look, his office was like 4.5 miles away from the property. I'm like, what do you want us to do? We can't literally go and find someone that is within a mile of every property. So with that, Mike, you had an interesting experience here recently where you had an appraiser had actually called out Tidewater before getting out to the property.
Yeah, they came into the property because they couldn't find the right comps. And so he called Tidewater so that we had a chance to get him the correct appraisals would have. He could have appraised the property correct.
Mike, I think we're having a bad connection here. I'm not able to hear you. But what Mike was sharing with us earlier was a story where the appraiser kind of hit a roadblock before he went out and inspected the property. And that's not common, but I know sometimes there's a little mystery to how appraisers work. But when the VA assigns that appraisal, or an appraisal management company assigns that inspection to an appraiser, they're going to do some homework. They don't generally go out and inspect the property first. They want to get an idea of the neighborhood and the comparables that they're going to be using. They need to get pictures of those comparables. So most of the time, they're going to lay out their work and they're going to say, hey, these are the 3 to 6 properties that I think are the best comps for this home. I'm going to go out and drive those. So it sounds like in Mike's situation here that the agent looked at it and said, I'm not seeing the value at all, and asked for help before even getting out to the property. But again, it's one of the big benefits of a VA loan in that we get that opportunity to collaboratively share information before they even provide the report. Now, even at that point, if we've given them information and they come back and they don't adjust to the sale price, Claudia, in either of those situations that you had, did either of them get adjusted higher or possibly all the way to your sale price?
Yeah, actually, it was a $47,000 deficit. We had to do an ROV, a reconsideration of value. My buyer had to write a letter and they gave us the full price. So that was a $47,000 difference. But to go back to what you said about location and locality, in the high desert of California in San Bernardino County, I've had appraisers come from as far as Lake Tahoe, which is totally not anywhere in Southern California, but that is who picked up the order for that appraisal. And so, not to get off topic, but I think with this passing of the VA appraisal changes and allowing for more appraisers to become VA certified, it's going to help maybe have more local appraisers in every area, because that's the issue, is really you have to be able to do VA loans. Not all appraisers can.
And Claudia, you're dead right. Like for us in Southern California, in the Bay Area, even Sacramento, that's fairly built out, we don't have a lack of appraisers. We've got lots of them. But if you get to something that's a little further out, desert area where you're at here in California, you get to rural areas, someone wants to do a VA appraisal, there might not be an appraiser for 150, 200 miles. Now that's different than being 10 miles away. And we talked about 10 miles away can be difficult. 100, 150 miles, you're the nearest appraiser or the nearest available appraiser. That can be difficult. But you talked about something really important. And Mike, let's see if your connection is doing any better for us right now. I would love for you to walk us through. So let's say Tidewater gets invoked. We give them more information and they still come back and say, okay, I can give it a little more value, but I'm still $10,000 short of what the sale price is. Does that mean that we're stuck? Or with a VA appraisal, do you still have an option to try and get that valuation increased to the sale price? I think you're still on mute, Mike.
Better.
We can hear you now. Let's see how the connection goes this time. We're not having any luck on this end, Mike. Every time I go to you, it's freezing up on us. Well, let's go back and just talk about that. So if they invoke Tidewater, we provide information, listing agent, selling agent, lender. We gather all the information we have. We try and provide that to the appraiser. They still bring in that value less than the sale price. Does not mean we're stuck. Claudia just had a very good example. At that point, when we now have the report and it comes in low, with the VA, we can go directly to them and do what's called an ROV, a reconsideration of value. And what that is the buyer, the veteran, needs to put in their own words why they believe the value is there. We can put the same documentation, the same information that both agents had provided, and give that to the VA. And it doesn't necessarily go back to the appraiser. It is in the hands of a staff appraiser at the VA to make that decision. So again, it's not someone who's dug in their heels and said, nope, this is the value. They are looking at it both from the veteran's perspective, saying, okay, I'm listening and hearing why the veteran thinks this home is worth this. And they're looking at it saying, is this a reasonable risk for the VA to make in terms of guaranteeing this loan? So I can say from my perspective, we have both the greatest probability of success in terms of just a win rate on those reconsiderations of value, and then also the biggest magnitude of corrections there. Claudia, you were saying what, $47,000 on yours?
$47,000 difference. Yep.
And what was the purchase price on that?
647.
So 647. So you have what, a 6-7%
It was
change?
7%. Yeah.
Yeah. I had one in the fall, same thing. Market's kind of changing, and we had an appraiser that dug in his heels, and he was right. Both agents knew that the valuation was going to be difficult and probably wasn't there, but they were expecting it to be like $10,000 to $20,000 short, and he brought in $100,000 short. So we got 74,000 of that 100 back on a reconsideration of value, and it held our deal together. They both sides gave, and sort of back to the original point of what are the options here. Our veteran could have backed out of the transaction, but everyone gave a little bit and arrived at the secondary value after Tidewater, after the ROV, still comes in a little bit low, but closer to our valuation, and everyone was able to come to terms. Sam, again, you from the real estate side, you may deal with as many VA transactions as anyone we know here. Are you seeing similar numbers, or are you seeing more likely with a VA appraiser to be able to get to a number when it comes in low, or what's your experience been?
I haven't had any ROVs this year, but last year I did have a few, but mainly because we were dealing with a lot of new construction halts. So homes hadn't closed, so the value that they needed wasn't there. So we had to show them pending sales, the overall market shift with pre-owned sales. So we had some of those $100,000 dips. We just had to show them, hey, currently due to the market, homes haven't sold because of XYZ, material shortages, et cetera. But that was last year. I have not had any this year thus far.
Talk about that a little bit, because I think anyone watching here, I think buyers in general feel like the appraiser is to a degree God in these transactions. What the appraiser says is the value. Mm-hmm. Why don't both of you kind of enlighten us on what is the value? And we're talking about transactions where buyer and seller in an open market, you guys put the home into the multiple listing service. It hits Zillow, it hits Redfin. Anyone interested in buying knows that home is for sale. And a buyer and seller come to an agreement on a value in an open market, and the appraiser comes in with a different number. So why don't you comment, Sam, on what is the actual value, and then how that relates to an appraisal, and kind of elaborate. You hinted at some of the things that can cause it to be very difficult for an appraiser to reach the value that the buyer and seller have agreed upon, because they are bound by some constraints of what they have to have in terms of recent comps and things of that sort. So either one of you just kind of maybe gives the folks watching at home some insight into reasons why an appraisal can be accurate, but still come in low, but not be the right answer of what that home is worth.
Oh, okay. So this is an all-day class. No, I'm just playing. It really is. So the reason why you have all these variances with different appraisers or an appraiser, period, is because it's an opinion of value. So me and Claudia, we go into the system, we see 20 houses in a neighborhood that fit our comps for a specific property that we're trying to list. Out of those 20, we'll pull 3 to 6 of what our choosing that we think best fits this property. Once we run our numbers, it gives us a value, the average, the median, the highest. And then we get to, talk to the seller and say, hey, based off of what we see, these are where you can list your property from. And then we choose a number, put it on the market, and hope and pray we get what we asking for. But it is an opinion. So it's the appraiser's opinion off of which comps they choose to use. Example, when I was going to buy my mom's house years ago from her, I was trying to get a good deal. And I got 3 different appraisals. I got a conventional appraisal, a VA appraisal, and an FHA appraisal because I just wanted to test it out, right? All 3 of them came back with different numbers. The VA appraisal came in the highest. My conventional came in the lowest. So they were all about a $15,000 or $20,000 gap between the number that I received in regards to the value for the property. So the main
tonight is just not the night for our connection. Sam was making a great point, and she went silent and turned sideways on us. So I don't even know where we're at with that.
Josh, I would say it's really perception. The appraiser's perception of what the market is doing. If you have an appraiser who thinks, oh my gosh, the values are going down dramatically, that's how they're going to be pricing everything. They're going to be looking for comps that are lower instead of higher. So it has a lot to do with perception.
Well, let me give an example that is just the perfect example of the point that you're making. That home that I was talking about here that just came in low is conventional loan. The guy's like 5 miles away, and my agents are convinced he knows nothing and isn't in the neighborhood. But what we can say for certain, very pessimistic about the market. He showed up and is telling our listing agent, this market has dropped and it's still dropping and we haven't seen the bottom yet. And the agent says, okay, my seller sells about 3 or 4 of these a year. They always get top of market for it. It's, I believe Charles Dubois is the architect, famous mid-century modern architect. They had put $350,000 into the property, literally as gorgeous a property as you can see. But this guy was predisposed to thinking market's dropping, value's not there. And when we did the rebuttal, he's actually calling the listing agents on a couple of the comps. There was some secondary comparable sales that had not yet closed. And he's calling the agent, basically telling them the same thing. Hey, the market's going down. And they're like, okay, cool. But we're in LA. There's a lot of money. This is a high-end area. These homes were almost $2 million. And there is a subset of people that want these architecturally significant properties. So like, you're not taking that into account. Not a VA appraisal, but our appraisal management company worked with our appraiser to make him see that there were additional comps that supported that value. So it's a really good example that it's an opinion. What I loved about what Sam said before she ran away on us and left the 2 of us alone here, what I love that she said is she, on that transaction that she was involved in, had 3 separate appraisals. And they don't even have to be a VA, conventional, and any other type of appraisal. Send 3 VA appraisers out there. It is highly unlikely that if we don't give them the purchase contract, that they all come back and tell us the exact same value. They're going to should be in a pretty narrow range, but they're all going to come back with different values. The example that I like to use, I didn't enjoy being in that market, and I'm glad that we've moved past it. But say in the middle of 2021, here in Southern California, you'd have a house and there would be 35 offers on it. And one of those offers wins. And as part of winning that bidding process, they had to waive their appraisal contingency. And the buyer would say, well, I don't want to overpay for the property. If it doesn't appraise, what am I going to do? I say, the market has already told you what that home is worth. There were 35 offers, 10 of which got countered and were identical to yours. And we know within that range, that's what the home is worth. Now, the appraiser is playing catch up with the data. When every sale is going up 2 to 3% over the last one, very hard for them to get multiple sales that support that value because it's just stair stepping up. In a normal market, you'll have a higher sale and a lower sale based off of maybe one has a pool, one has a recently remodeled kitchen, but condition varies, location varies, even within model matches. So all of that, I like to tell my borrowers, do not get hung up on the appraised value. It is important, but it is not the be all end all. The appraiser isn't God. It is an important voice in the room that has to support our numbers, but your agent, the listing agent, your loan officer, they know what they're doing also, and are going to protect you and make sure you don't get into a tough spot there. Now, we have a question over here, and we don't have anyone from North Carolina. So we're going to see if a Texas realtor, a California realtor, and a California lender can figure out what in the world DD fees are. So our question is, how does this come into play in North Carolina with due diligence fees? Well, there, it says it right at the beginning, due diligence fees. There's earnest money deposit and due diligence fees, and the DD is non-refundable, almost like paying the seller to remove their home from the market. Does the amendatory clause protect them with due diligence or just the earnest money deposit? Now, I'm assuming, would you guys agree that we're probably talking about your home inspection, survey, other things that have to be done? What are due diligence fees?
So I'm gonna speak in regards to Texas and what I've learned over the last few years with different agents in regards to due diligence. But in Texas, earnest money deposit is refundable in the event that you meet the contract guidelines for that refundable earnest money. We do not have due diligence. We have an option fee, but that's for inspection. But due diligence fees, from what I'm told, is similar to earnest money that is non-refundable. So she's definitely going to have to check her contract in regards to whether the appraisal will allow that to be refunded. But Claudia, what about you?
We just have the earnest money deposit as well. I mean, we don't have due diligence fees. So usually by default, our contracts give the buyer 17 days to complete all the inspections that they'd like. And in those 17 days, if there's anything that they don't like for any reason at all, they can cancel and get their deposit back. The issue becomes when you go beyond that and then you want to cancel. And really in California, because we have escrow companies who are supposed to be a neutral third party, escrow can't refund the deposit to either side without both sides' consent.
Yep. Same in Texas. You have to have both party consents to release any of the earnest money, unless it's during the period where you just get that option to back out during that time, and then they can release it without two consents. But after that time frame, you definitely need both parties to sign. But due diligence from a realtor that I know that's in North Carolina, I believe that is non-refundable, but you need to read the contract in regards to the actual appraisal, the lower appraisal value and the escape clause.
And let's go back, because to me, the spirit of the law says that you shouldn't be incurring fees that would be forfeited to the seller if the transaction falls apart because the value is not there. But I said early in the show that we would actually read this amendatory clause, VA specific. So it says, it is expressly agreed that notwithstanding any other provisions of this contract, the purchaser shall not incur any penalty by forfeiture of earnest money or otherwise be obligated to complete the purchase of the property described herein if the contract purchase price or cost exceeds the reasonable value of the property established by the Department of Veterans Affairs. The purchaser shall, however, have the privilege and option of proceeding with the consummation of this contract without regard to the amount of the reasonable value established by the Department of Veterans Affairs. So to me, like what it's saying is shall not incur any penalty by forfeiture of earnest money. They're specifically calling out earnest money. So I wish we had a North Carolina realtor in here, but if you're in North Carolina, you want to know how that plays out, go out to the map and vetted VA and reach out to one of the approved North Carolina realtors, or if you're already working with a realtor in that area, hopefully they have VA experience and can get you the accurate answer to that one. We have another one here that's really just a comment. It says, truth, the contract is basically a cheat sheet for the appraiser. I get people that ask this all the time. Like, why do we provide the contract to the appraiser up front? It's the math is an opinion. It's math and there's guidelines, but why are we giving them the value? And I get the question, Claudia, you probably get this one as well. Like, how come it 90% of the time it comes in exactly at our sales price? We talked about if we send 3 appraisers out there blind, we're probably going to get 3 values back. Probably none of those 3 values are going to be exactly what our sales price is. It's just an interesting comment. I have that one all the time. I wonder why we are giving them the contract up front. I know that it helps them in knowing what the value is, if there's any concessions, what type of financing. There's lots of details in there that the appraiser needs, but they should redact the purchase price and let them truly come in with the value. But if we did that, I mean, it would be more likely that we would probably have appraisals coming in slightly low. I don't think it would make them come in hugely low, but it is an interesting coincidence that our values almost always, 8-9 times out of 10 in a normal market will come in at our sale price. Anything else that you guys wanted to cover? anything on the appraisal topic or how that can work its way through the amendatory clause, and what you think members of a vetted VA should know when they're entering into a purchase transaction?
One thing is just to read your contracts. A lot of people, even though you have an agent representing you, a lender on your side, or an attorney, or whomever you have helping you through the process, you are the person buying the home. We are not the ones buying the home. So read your contracts. I get so many people who do not read through their documents, and these addendums are in there, and it will better help you understand what you're signing and your outs. Texas has well over 20 plus outs for buyers to get out of a contract, even after their inspection period. But the buyer probably only knows of a couple because that's all they hear. But if you actually read through your contract, you would know, okay, if I don't like this by this time, I can back out. If I don't like this by this time, I still have this out. And then you look at the last out in the time frame that you have for you to be like, okay, no, I don't want this house. So read your contracts, read them.
This is an area that the real estate side is very different than mortgage. Closing costs will vary from state to state and even region to region within a state, but our loan guidelines are the same, coast to coast. You know, we can tell you what can be done. I sort of had a shock here 2 years ago. My aunt was supposed to close on a 30-day escrow of their home in Lake Havasu City, Arizona. And like 2 days before, the guy goes, yeah, I'm backing out. I'm like, what are you talking about? So Claudia, you had talked about our normal timeframes. If you don't change anything with the standard California contract, you have 17 days to get rid of your appraisal contingency, to get rid of your loan contingency, your inspection contingency. So you have 2.5 weeks to do all your due diligence and say, yes, I'm going forward with this. In Arizona, I don't have the contract in front of me. It's like until like 2 days before when you can back out. So Texas is different than that. We have a situation here in North Carolina, different than that. So it may be tempting if you have a family member, an uncle, an aunt, your mom sells houses in Florida, and you're in a transaction in Michigan, and you want to say, hey, mom, what's going on with this? Those contracts, they're probably 80%, maybe even 90% similar, but there are some pretty significant differences. And it's not as big of a deal because realtors are far less likely to operate in multiple states unless they're in a border area. I work with an agent in Lake Tahoe, and part of that's California, part of that's Nevada. So in an area like that, they know Nevada and California contracts. But if you're not dealing with someone that's operating, you know, in two markets like that, highly unlikely that they're going to know the details of your contract and how it works. And much like Sam just said, you're probably not going to read that contract to the detail that you should. So make sure you're dealing with an agent that knows it like the back of their hand. And again, I'm not saying this to beat up on any agents, but like we talked earlier in the show, a lot of agents don't even know what this amendatory clause is. Mm-hmm. Many of them, you can pull lots of clauses out of their standard contract, and they're like, they couldn't explain it to you. They're written by lawyers. It's not necessarily your job, but you guys know probably every couple of years, the contract in your state gets updated and the board does classes. Come in here and know this. You're not a lawyer and this is legalese, but you need to know it like the back of your hand. And there are plenty of part-time agents, don't sell lots of homes a year and can't give you that guidance. And it is truly critical and essential that you're working with a pro that can do that for you. We've kind of gone through all of our questions, but Claudia, you have something?
Yeah, I do. Actually, we also have, because like Texas did, we have our own fair appraisal addendum now after all the craziness in the seller's market. So it does say that any appraisal on the property is required to be unbiased, and it does list military or veteran status as not something that you can discriminate against. So besides that, if there's some closing remarks that I can give, it's just don't give up your negotiating power. Because if you right at the beginning, we got into the habit, and I say we, but I mean the agents who are pro waiving contingencies and all of those things, people got into the habit of waiving things without realizing that that is your negotiating power. If you waive that from the beginning and then later on you want to negotiate a lower price because of the appraisal, you don't have that option anymore. So don't waive that. And then always do the first thing, which is asking the seller to reduce the price. Sometimes it's just a matter of asking them like, hey, the appraisal didn't come in, so now we have to lower the price. You'd be surprised how many times sellers will say, okay, well, I guess that's what we have to do. And then you don't have to go through all of these other things to try to get a higher price, and that'll save your buyer some money.
One of the big things that I say, Claudia, people will always ask, well, I just want to use a Redfin agent because they'll give me back a rebate, or they'll ask the agent, hey, Redfin will do this, or so and such agency will do this. Will you give me some of your commission? And the point that I like to make is the number one most important thing that your realtor can do for you is to be your negotiator at that table. If they can't win a negotiation with you, and their benefit is giving you a paycheck of $1,000, $2,000, whatever, other than very large transactions, these rebates are generally not that large. A realtor saving you 1% on a $500,000 home is $5,000. It's a lot more than getting a little bit of a rebate or a credit. So it's not always that simple, but truly you guys' job, if I'm hiring a realtor, I want to know how you negotiate. And it's not, hey, I'm a bulldog and I'm mean and nasty and no one likes to deal with me. Could be that you're the sweetest, nicest person in the world and you get everything you want and make people think that they wanted to give it to you. So negotiation is really, really big. Knowledge of the contracts, knowledge of the timelines, knowledge of all your contingencies. And again, for realtors, knowledge of the VA loan program, because it is unique. It is a minority of loans done in the market. And in non-VA markets, like for us here in Orange and even LA County, 30 years ago, most of our military bases were shut down. Doesn't mean we don't have veterans here, but it means it's not like you're in South Carolina where they have veterans falling out the sky, or San Diego where we have, lots of Navy, lots of Marines. Yeah. So it is important that you're working with someone that knows that end of the transaction. So hopefully tonight we gave you some insight of what that amendatory or escape clause is, how it's a benefit and a positive for you, but how sellers may potentially look at it in a negative light, and how you and your realtor and sometimes your lender can step in and help sort of keep things smoothed over and moving forward. It's a positive, it's a good thing for you, and hopefully you have a good understanding of it now. So I was hoping that Sam would pop back in here and we can get some closing comments from her. But if you don't have anything to add, Claudia, I appreciate you being here tonight, sharing your knowledge, information, and expertise. Appreciate Sam being here despite the technical difficulties. And unfortunately, we didn't get a lot of insight from Mike because of his technical difficulties. But thank all three of you for being here. And we will be back next week covering another topic. So if you have any questions that you would like a longer, more in-depth answer, either from one of our vetted moderators on the real estate or mortgage side, every Tuesday we're here. Save up the question. Come back next Tuesday, 5 o'clock Pacific, 8 o'clock Eastern, or whatever the equivalents are on the in-between states, and ask those questions, and we'll be here to answer them. All right. Have a great night, everybody.